Have you ever wondered what secrets hide behind Hollywood's golden glow? Many icons celebrated for their on-screen heroism harbored racist beliefs and actions off-camera. From John Wayne's 1971 endorsement of white supremacy to D.W. Griffith's 1915 epic praising the Ku Klux Klan, get ready to meet legendary stars whose prejudices shaped their legacies and American culture. Exploring a side of classic cinema is rarely revealed, where glamour truly masked bigotry. John Wayne. On July 1st, 1971, a startling interview in Playboy magazine shattered the myth of an all-American hero. John Wayne, renowned for his frontier roles and rugged persona, declared, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility," dismissing the civil rights movement as a misguided threat to social order. Just weeks earlier, he had donated $5,000 to George Wallace's segregationist presidential campaign, aligning himself publicly with forces opposing desegregation. At rodeos and stock shows that summer, Wayne warned that busing would destroy American education, invoking language echoed by white supremacist groups. His personal correspondence, published in Wayne's collected letters, reveals contempt for Native Americans as savages unworthy of land rights or cultural respect. Despite starring opposite black and Latino actors in films such as The Alamo 1960 and The Green Berets 1968, he never used his influence to advocate for more dignified portrayals or equitable treatment on set. In private gatherings, he reportedly ridiculed black athletes, suggesting they lacked the discipline for professional sports. His ranch dinners became the setting for boasts about preserving traditional social hierarchies. After his death in 1979, retrospectives noted how Wayne's endorsements of segregation and explicit racial rhetoric lent legitimacy to extremist views during a volatile era, leaving a legacy as conflicted as the frontier heroes he portrayed. D.W. Griffith. In February 1915, a controversial epic premiered at Clunes Auditorium in Los Angeles, forever altering both film language and social attitudes. D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. 1915 used groundbreaking cross-cutting, close-ups, and massive crowd scenes to tell a story that portrayed black men as brutal rapists and glorified the Ku Klux Klan as noble saviors of white society. Within months, the film grossed more than $10 million at the box office, an astronomical sum for the era, while inciting race riots in cities such as Omaha and Lexington. President Woodrow Wilson reportedly described it as like writing history with lightning, lending presidential approval to its toxic propaganda. Griffith defended his work as artistic realism, but privately referred to black Americans in letters as barbarous, and urged studios to produce more films keeping non-white characters in subservient roles. The NAACP organized protests in New York and Chicago, gathering over 10,000 signatures, yet failed to halt nationwide distribution. In the South Theater, owners often held Klan recruitment rallies after screenings, recruiting hundreds of new members. Despite the moral outcry, Griffith's reputation as a cinematic pioneer endured, and he never issued an apology. His later films steered clear of overt racial themes, but he resisted calls to confront the human cost of his masterpiece, cementing a legacy of innovation entwined with the spread of hateful ideology. Walter Brennan. An Academy ceremony in 1936 honored a man whose off-screen views would shock audiences decades later. Walter Brennan collected his first Oscar for Come and Get It that year, going on to win again in 1938 for Kentucky and in 1940 for The Westerner. His gravelly voice and affable screen presence made him one of Hollywood's most beloved character actors. Behind the scenes, however, Brennan harbored a vehement segregationist ideology. Studio insiders at MGM recalled overhearing him boast that the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was long overdue, remarks he repeated in private gatherings throughout the 1960s. In letters to a small Southern newspaper published in 1965, he lamented that civil rights protesters were upsetting the natural order and praised politicians who vowed to preserve Jim Crow laws. Cast and crew on westerns such as Rio Bravo later described Brennan's habit of ridiculing black stunt performers and insisting they remain out of camera range unless absolutely necessary. Even as he portrayed kindly mentors on screen, he refused to share dressing rooms with actors of color and lobbied directors to minimize their roles. Film historians point to his dual reputation, warmth before the camera, bitterness behind it, as emblematic of a broader industry hypocrisy. Brennan's death in 1974 did little to soften his legacy. Retrospectives still grapple with reconciling his three-time Oscar status and the bigotry he openly expressed at studio luncheons and charity events. Walt Disney. Behind the enchanting cartoons and whimsical parks lay a man whose personal prejudices influenced his world. Walt Disney, born in 1901, revolutionized animation with Steamboat Willie in 1928 and Snow White in 1937. Yet testimonies from former employees and company memos reveal a pattern of anti-Semitic and racist attitudes. In 1938, he hosted a private screening for Leni Riefenstahl, the German filmmaker known for Nazi propaganda, and spoke admiringly of her technical prowess. When studio artists circulated a 1945 petition condemning racial discrimination, Disney refused to sign, leading to a walkout by Jewish animators that ended only after he rehired them under pressure from studio executives. Early shorts, such as The Opry House and cartoons in the Silly Symphonies series, included caricatures of African Americans and Asians that reinforced harmful stereotypes. In 1946, Song of the South presented an idyllic plantation world populated by caricatured black characters, sparking protests from civil rights groups even as it earned Disney a special Academy Award. Company archives showed Disney declined to remove offensive sequences, arguing they were integral to the story. His refusal to acknowledge the harm caused by these depictions contrasted sharply with the family-friendly image he cultivated in public. By the time of his death in 1966, Disneyland stood as a symbol of American optimism, while the studio's animated classics continued to bear traces of the prejudices held by their creator, Steppin Fetchit. A single screen credit in 1932 launched Lincoln Perry into history as Steppin Fetchit, yet the price of fame proved steep. His lazy fool persona brought him to the attention of studio heads seeking novelty, and he became the first black actor to receive on-screen billing in a major feature. Millions of ticket buyers laughed at his exaggerated gait and stammering delivery in films such as Welcome Danger and The Big Broadcast of 1936. Behind the scenes, civil rights leaders denounced Fetchit's roles as perpetuating the myth of black inferiority, arguing that audiences internalized harmful stereotypes. In private correspondence, he confessed to a journalist that he adopted the character to secure financial stability for his family, but he also admitted feeling deep shame each time he donned the costume. His salary reached $10,000 a week at the height of his popularity, yet studios refused to cast him in dignified parts or allow him creative control. By 1940, he found himself sidelined as new black performers demanded roles with substance. Later in life, he faced bankruptcy and obscurity, still haunted by the caricature he had created. Even as his caricature faded from screens, the legacy of Steppin Fetchit lingered as a testament to the limited choices afforded to minority actors in an industry steeped in prejudice. Mickey Rooney, an Academy Award nominee before Breakfast at Tiffany's, would cast a long shadow over Mickey Rooney's reputation. In 1961, he accepted the role of Mr. Yunyoshi, a Japanese caricature in a high-profile romantic comedy. He applied prosthetic buck teeth and slanted his eyes with tape to provoke laughter, a performance defended by the studio as harmless humor. In interviews years later, Rooney dismissed criticism as oversensitivity, insisting that the character was just good fun. Asian American activists countered that the portrayal revived painful stereotypes from wartime propaganda and inspired mockery in neighborhoods and schools. Despite mounting backlash, Rooney never issued a public apology, and the role resurfaced in retrospectives as a glaring example of Hollywood's insensitivity. Cast members recalled discomfort on set as Rooney refused to adjust his performance, even when co-stars privately urged him to reconsider. Box office receipts proved that audiences still flocked to see his antics, underscoring how entrenched such depictions remained. In later decades, the film was re-evaluated by critics and scholars who cited it as emblematic of a broader failure to respect non-white communities. Rooney's steadfast defense of the role cemented his status as a cautionary figure in discussions of racial representation on screen. Jolson. A pioneer of the talking picture whose legacy rests on minstrel traditions, Al Jolson debuted in 1927 as the star of the first feature-length sound film. He appeared in blackface throughout The Jazz Singer, delivering lines in exaggerated dialect and singing songs that reinforced caricatures of black life. Audiences marveled at hearing voices on screen for the first time, yet few questioned the cost to black performers who remained excluded from leading roles. Jolson continued to don blackface on vaudeville stages and radio broadcasts well into the 1940s, each performance normalizing a practice that mocked African American speech and culture. Behind closed doors, he expressed private regret, telling a friend that he wished it could be different, yet he never renounced the makeup or the routine that had made him famous. Contemporary newspapers praised his energy and showmanship, but black newspapers condemned his acts as demeaning. Theater managers reported that Jolson's presence boosted ticket sales, but also sparked protests outside venues in New York and Chicago. Even as civil rights advocates pushed for an end to segregation, Jolson's blackface routines remained a reminder of how deeply racial mockery was woven into American entertainment. Katharine Hepburn. A portrait of fierce independence often obscured Katharine Hepburn's participation in a practice now deemed offensive. In late 1943, studio executives approached her with the role of Jade Tan in Dragon Seed, set against the backdrop of rural China during the 1937 Japanese invasion. Hepburn agreed to undergo extensive makeup sessions that transformed her features with prosthetics, darkening her skin tone and altering her eye shape. Press releases from December 1943 touted her commitment to authenticity, yet internal studio memos reveal concerns that hiring an actual Asian actress might confuse audiences or violate state miscegenation laws. Reviews upon the film's June 1944 release praised Hepburn's dramatic range, but omitted any discussion of the racial implications. In letters housed at the New York Public Library, she described the role as a challenge, yet never acknowledged the impact on Asian American performers. That same year, civil rights activists circulated petitions criticizing yellowface casting in Hollywood, citing Dragon Seed as a prime example of industry bias. Hepburn continued to accept high-profile parts without addressing these criticisms, focusing instead on roles that showcased her trademark wit and physicality. By the time she won her second Academy Award in 1968 for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, she had become a symbol of progressive values, yet her earlier choices remained unexamined. Interviews from the 1970s show her reflecting on social change without ever connecting it to her own career decisions. As modern scholars reassess Dragon Seed in film studies courses, the film stands as a reminder of how even celebrated talents reinforced exclusionary practices, weaving a complex legacy that contrasts her on-screen heroism with off-screen silence on matters of racial representation. Fred Astaire, a single dance number in 1936, cast a long shadow over Fred Astaire's celebrated career. During production of Swing Time, Astaire agreed to perform the Bojangles of Harlem sequence, a tribute to tap legend Bill Robinson, yet filmed in blackface that darkened his skin and exaggerated his lips. RKO production notes from October 1936 show debate among producers about removing the scene, but they ultimately retained it to avoid upsetting white audiences who associated blackface with traditional vaudeville comedy. Contemporary reviews in Variety praised Astaire's athleticism and choreographic precision without addressing the racial caricature. In personal correspondence, he defended the routine as homage, writing to choreographer Hermes Pan that, "This dance honors a great artist." Cast members later recalled discomfort on set, with Robinson himself refusing to watch the final cut. Newspapers serving black communities, including the Chicago Defender, ran editorials condemning the number as demeaning, arguing that such portrayals perpetuated stereotypes of African Americans as objects of ridicule. Astaire never issued a public apology and continued to feature the sequence in retrospective compilations of his work. Decades later, film historians such as John Muller cited the Bojangles of Harlem routine as a stark example of mainstream entertainment's complicity in racist tropes. Astaire's reputation for grace and innovation remains untarnished for many, yet this episode underscores how even groundbreaking artists participated in practices now understood as harmful, embedding a troubling contradiction at the heart of his legacy. Spencer Tracy. a leading man renowned for portraying principled characters, revealed private views at odds with his on-screen morality. During the early 1940s, Spencer Tracy lobbied MGM executives to remove or minimize scenes featuring minority actors, believing that audiences preferred films focused on white protagonists. Production notes for Woman of the Year in 1942 record Tracy's request to cut a scene with a black nightclub singer, a decision made despite the singer's praised vocal performance. Biographer James Curtis quotes a colleague who remembered Tracy dismissing civil rights activists as agitators stirring up trouble. On the set of Judgment at Nuremberg in 1961, Tracy refused to socialize with black cast members, instead choosing solitary meals in his trailer. Press interviews never probed these behaviors, focusing instead on his understated acting style and devotion to craft. In private letters to close friends, he referred to integration as a passing fad, remarks discovered in archives at the University of Southern California. Tracy's career spanned more than 5 decades, earning him 2 Academy Awards, yet his personal correspondence and studio records reveal a steadfast resistance to racial equality. Even as he portrayed figures who championed justice and human dignity, Tracy's off-screen actions reinforced the barriers he refused to challenge publicly, illustrating a dissonance between his cinematic heroism and personal prejudice. Hattie McDaniel. A milestone in Academy history could not erase the indignities Hattie McDaniel endured. In October 1939, she won Best Supporting Actress for Gone with the Wind, becoming the first African-American Oscar recipient. That night, she accepted her award seated at a segregated table at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles, a stipulation imposed by studio officials to comply with local Jim Crow laws. Newspaper reports highlighted her achievement while omitting the humiliation of service entrance arrivals and separate seating. McDaniel's salary for the film was $3,000 per week, a fraction of the pay commanded by white co-stars, yet she leveraged her status to negotiate slightly better terms in subsequent roles. In 1944, she appeared in Song of the South, again portraying a subservient character in blackface-style makeup. Civil rights leaders such as Walter White publicly criticized her for accepting such roles, arguing they reinforced damaging stereotypes. McDaniel defended her choices in interviews, emphasizing the visibility her performances provided, yet private letters reveal she felt torn between ambition and dignity. Studio archives indicate that executives offered her no alternatives, citing audience expectations. She remained typecast for the rest of her career, appearing in over 30 films without escaping the mammy archetype. Her death in 1952 prompted obituaries that celebrated her barrier-breaking Oscar win, but glossed over the systemic racism that shaped her path, leaving a legacy of both triumph and constraint. Anna May Wong. A trailblazer whose career was curtailed by prejudice, Anna May Wong first captured Hollywood's attention in the early 1920s, yet never received the leading roles her talent deserved. In 1922, she secured a supporting part in The Toll of the Sea, earning praise for her emotive presence, but studios consistently relegated her to secondary parts. In 1937, she auditioned for the role of Olan in The Good Earth, only to be passed over in favor of Louise Rayner, a decision justified by executives as necessary to avoid miscegenation controversies and ensure box office success. European studios welcomed her, and in 1929 she starred in Piccadilly to critical acclaim, demonstrating her range in a non-American context. Returning to Hollywood, she faced a dearth of substantial offers, limited to playing maids or exotic villains. Press interviews in the late 1930s quote her, lamenting the industry's narrow vision, yet few producers offered alternatives. During the production of Shanghai Express in 1932, she filmed a cameo that required minimal dialogue, while Marlene Dietrich received top billing. Wong's persistence led her to television in the 1950s, where she co-starred in The Gallery of Madame Liu's Song, one of the first American series led by an Asian actress. Despite these achievements, her health declined, and she died in 1961 at age 56. Retrospectives now celebrate her as a pioneer who challenged Hollywood's racial barriers, even as her story underscores the industry's entrenched exclusion. Lionel Barrymore. A genteel screen presence concealed deeply held prejudices that emerged behind the scenes. During the filming of Mrs. Miniver in 1942, Lionel Barrymore objected to sharing makeup trailers with black actors, prompting MGM to assign separate facilities for minority performers. Studio memoranda from March of that year record his insistence that outsiders remain apart, a stance accommodated without public acknowledgement. In July of 1948, he attended a fundraiser for the state's Rights Democratic Party, donating signed photographs and cash to support segregationist platforms opposing federal civil rights legislation. Letters preserved at the Margaret Herrick Library reveal Barrymore's nostalgia for the antebellum South, describing it as a simpler era of proper order. Crew members on It's a Wonderful Life recounted his refusal to dine in the same mess hall as African-American staff, a decision production managers quietly enforced to avoid on-set conflict. Publicly, he portrayed benevolent patriarchs, yet private accounts from assistants describe him muttering about outsiders during test screenings. Press coverage of his career praised his versatility from Grand Hotel through Key Largo, without probing these off-screen actions. Following his death in 1954, obituaries celebrated his contributions to film and stage while omitting the intolerance he practiced. Decades later, film historians uncovered studio archives that documented his segregationist demands, casting a new light on the disparity between Barrymore's public image and personal convictions. His legacy remains entwined with the warmth he brought to beloved characters and the cold exclusion he enforced behind the camera, a contrast that continues to challenge perceptions of Hollywood's golden era. Leslie Howard, a refined intellect and suave screen persona, masked interventions that upheld racial exclusion. In early 1939, studio cables from Gone with the Wind record Leslie Howard's demand that black extras be relegated to distant background roles, arguing that visible faces of color would distract from the film's narrative. He wrote to producer David O. Selznick that audiences expected a cohesive visual epic, a view that effectively erased meaningful presence of African-American performers. During production of Pygmalion in 1938, he refused to rehearse scenes involving immigrant characters portrayed by non-white actors, resulting in their exclusion from promotional stills and marketing materials. Biographers describe dinner conversations in which Howard dismissed colonized peoples as needing guidance, reflecting paternalistic attitudes common among British expatriates. Letters held in private collections show him referring to foreign-born actors as novelties rather than equals. Despite his on-screen portrayals of progressive characters such as Professor Higgins, he maintained segregationist social circles, dining exclusively with white peers at Hollywood's elite clubs. His death in 1943 aboard the troop ship Nova Scotia cut short a career that balanced artistic ambition with exclusionary practices. Posthumous retrospectives lauded his performances in Intermezzo and The Scarlet Pimpernel, while rarely mentioning the studio memos that documented his efforts to minimize minority representation. Today, scholars study his films for their craftsmanship and confront the biases he embedded in production decisions, revealing a complex figure whose talent coexisted with entrenched prejudice. Errol Flynn, a swashbuckling hero off-screen, revealed troubling sympathies when cameras were off. In 1942, FBI files describe Errol Flynn praising Nazi Germany's efficiency and remarking that authoritarian rule offered stability that democracy could not match. Biographer Charles Hyam cites a letter from Flynn in late 1940, lamenting Jewish refugees arriving in Los Angeles as undesirable elements threatening American values. During filming of Captain Blood in 1935, he hosted private gatherings where he mocked Jewish and black refugees fleeing European persecution, comments recorded by uneasy guests. Studio correspondence from Warner Brothers in 1943 expresses concern that Flynn's views might damage the studio's reputation, yet no formal action was taken. Following the war, Flynn attempted to distance himself from these remarks, calling them youthful indiscretions in interviews, yet he never issued an apology or clarification. His flamboyant public persona and daring stunts in films like The Adventures of Robin Hood continued to draw audiences, overshadowing the darker aspects of his personal ideology. On location in Jamaica, he allegedly refused to share accommodations with non-white crew members, a demand quietly met by production managers. Flynn's death in 1959 prompted obituaries celebrating his cinematic achievements while overlooking the intolerance he voiced behind closed doors. Modern assessments of his legacy now grapple with the tension between his on-screen heroism and off-screen convictions, illustrating how celebrity status can shield prejudiced views from scrutiny. George Sanders. A sharp wit and elegant demeanor on screen concealed barbed commentary off-camera. In 1947, at a Hollywood dinner party, George Sanders quipped that the industry was drowning in socialism and garlic, a veiled insult aimed at Jewish and Italian communities. MGM assistants later documented his casual use of ethnic slurs during rehearsals for All About Eve in 1950, recalling a man who treated diversity as material for his sardonic humor. In letters to a close friend, he argued that casting only pure American stock in leading roles would ensure audience comfort, dismissing non-white actors as distractions. His performance as cynical sophisticates mirrored the elitism he espoused in private, and colleagues remember his habit of referring to non-white extras as fillers rather than performers. Press interviews from the early 1950s show him dismissing concerns about prejudice as political correctness run amok, remarks that alienated progressive industry figures. Despite these views, Sanders maintained friendships with certain European émigrés, a selective tolerance that excluded anyone he deemed ethnically or culturally different. His death by suicide in 1972 prompted tributes to his artistry, but rarely addressed the bigotry he wielded in private gatherings. Sanders' legacy remains a study in contrasts, his biting performances enduring even as his real-world intolerance casts a shadow over his celebrated filmography. Victor Mature. A commanding presence on screen contrasted with demands that erased minority visibility behind the scenes. During production of Samson and Delilah in 1949, Victor Mature insisted that scenes featuring Egyptian laborers be trimmed, arguing that non-white performers detracted from the epic scale. Cecil B. DeMille's production logs record multiple edits made at Mature's request, including removal of a marketplace sequence with minority extras. On the set of My Darling Clementine in 1946, crew members reported his habit of mocking black stunt performers and refusing to share screen time with them, a practice production managers accommodated to keep him on set. In interviews, Mature dismissed accusations of prejudice as misunderstandings, claiming his choices were driven by aesthetic concerns rather than bias. Studio correspondence reveals executives quietly addressed complaints without confronting Mature directly, fearing he would walk off the production and jeopardize the budget. His roles in Kiss of Death and Samson and Delilah solidified his star image, overshadowing the intolerance he exercised behind the camera. When he died in 1999, retrospectives celebrated his rugged charisma and memorable performances while glossing over the power he wielded to enforce exclusionary practices. Mature's story illustrates how star privilege in Hollywood's golden age could be used to marginalize minority performers without public consequence. Bette Davis. A reputation for fierce independence masked prejudices that surfaced in private circles. In 1938, Bette Davis refused to sign a Screen Actors Guild petition condemning Nazi persecution of Jews, reportedly stating she did not want Jews dictating her career. According to biographer Mel Gusso, Davis confided to close friends that Hollywood was overrun by Jewish interests, a sentiment she echoed in letters housed at the Academy's Margaret Herrick Library. During the filming of Jezebel in 1938, she clashed with director William Wyler over casting choices, objecting when he suggested hiring a Jewish costume designer. Studio memos from Warner Brothers in November that year note her insistence on replacing the designer with someone she deemed more suitable. In interviews later in her career, she downplayed these incidents, yet press reports from the Time reference whispered controversies on set. Co-stars recalled Davis using the slur kike in hallway conversations, prompting several Jewish extras to request reassignment. Despite her on-screen portrayals of strong, unconventional women, Davis maintained social circles that excluded Jewish colleagues, hosting parties where invitations specified no foreign types. Her award speeches and public appearances never addressed these attitudes, and her 1962 memoir omitted any reflection on discrimination. Davis's box office draw remained undiminished, allowing her to navigate Hollywood's elite without public consequence. Only decades after her death in 1989 did scholars begin examining studio archives and personal correspondence, revealing a dissonance between her celebrated screen persona and the biases she harbored off camera. John Ford, a master of the Western genre whose behind-the-scenes conduct betrayed deep-seated racism. In 1938, director John Ford wrote to producer Marion C. Cooper complaining that The Indians on set are as useless as the damn niggers in the South. Language preserved in studio correspondence at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. During the shooting of Stagecoach in late 1938, Ford insisted Native American extras remain off camera unless required for establishing shots, a demand that led to their dismissal from key battle sequences. Crew logs from the Searchers in 1956 record Ford's habit of referring to black grips as boy and ordering them to fetch his coffee, even when white assistants were available. At a 1940 wrap party, he reportedly toasted to the race that built this country, while explicitly excluding non-white guests. Ford's films often depicted Native Americans as obstacles to progress, reinforcing stereotypes he privately endorsed. Despite winning 4 Academy Awards for Best Director, Ford never faced public scrutiny for these actions. Interviews in the 1960s show him lauding his own casting choices as authentic, ignoring the systemic exclusion he enforced. His death in 1973 prompted retrospectives celebrating his cinematic innovations, yet only later did historians uncover the extent of his discriminatory practices, challenging the myth of Ford as a champion of American ideals. Wallace Beery, a box office titan whose off-screen behavior revealed intolerance toward minority performers. During the production of The Plainsman in 1936, Wallace Beery clashed with director Cecil B. DeMille over the inclusion of black cavalry extras. Production reports from Paramount Pictures note Beery's demand that all African-American performers be removed from close-up shots, asserting they distract from the hero's presence. In letters to studio executives dated March 1936, he referred to black actors as colored bits, unworthy of equal billing. On the set of The Champ in 1931, Beery reportedly used the slur nigger when addressing a black trainer, an incident recounted by stuntman Joe Irigoyen in a 1978 interview for the American Film Institute. Despite these controversies, Beery's gruff on-screen persona continued to draw audiences, and studio heads accommodated his demands to avoid production delays. In private gatherings, he mocked the efforts of civil rights activists, calling them a nuisance stirring trouble. Press coverage from the era focused on Beery's box office success and his Academy Award nomination in 1932, omitting any mention of his discriminatory conduct. Only with the release of studio archives in the 1990s did film scholars document Beery's role in enforcing racial hierarchies on set, exposing how even beloved stars perpetuated exclusion behind the scenes.